Your code is outdated and frankly useless. The words cut through the conference room like a blade, and 40 pairs of eyes turned to watch my reaction. My name is Devin Grant. I'm 41 years old, and I just watched nearly 4 years of my life get dismissed in a single sentence. Isabella Torres had been creative director for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Harvard MBA buzzwords and next-generation paradigms, compared to my years of building Aurora Entertainment's entire digital backbone from scratch. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. I simply smiled and reached for the USB drive in my pocket, the small device that held something Isabella couldn't possibly understand. She had no idea what she just unleashed or how completely she'd misunderstood what she was trying to destroy. Let me take you back to the beginning, when Aurora Entertainment was nothing more than 2 ambitious founders with a streaming platform idea and barely enough funding to rent a converted warehouse in downtown Seattle. Stacy and Carl had this vision of creating something that could compete with Netflix and Hulu. But when I walked into that cramped space in January 2020, reality hit hard. The place still smelled like motor oil from its previous life as an auto repair shop, and our entire tech setup consisted of 3 mismatched desks, a handful of refurbished servers, and an internet connection that dropped out whenever it rained. Stacy looked at me with this mixture of hope and desperation and said, "Devin, we need someone who can build this from nothing. Can you do it?" I nodded, not fully understanding what I was signing up for. Those first months tested every skill I'd developed over 15 years in software engineering. I was pulling 90-hour weeks debugging video compression algorithms that would crash without warning, sleeping on a cot wedged between server racks, because going home meant losing precious hours. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with my laptop keyboard imprinted on my cheek, lines of code still running through my dreams. Every day brought new challenges that had never been solved before. How do you build a content delivery network that can handle peak traffic without the budget for enterprise-grade hardware? How do you optimize streaming quality when your servers are literally held together with zip ties and determination? I spent weeks writing custom database queries, building security protocols from scratch, creating the entire back-end infrastructure that would eventually handle millions of concurrent users. The breakthrough came during year 2, when our buffering crisis threatened to kill the company before it really started. Users were abandoning streams after 30 seconds of loading, and our content partners were threatening to pull their deals. I locked myself in the warehouse for 3 straight days, surviving on energy drinks and determination, until I cracked the problem. My custom content delivery network didn't just solve our buffering issues. It made processing speeds 3 times faster, and Aurora's streaming quality superior to competitors with 10 times our budget. The first time I watched a movie stream flawlessly on our platform, with crystal clear 4K resolution and 0 interruptions, I felt something I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just code anymore. This was magic I'd created with my own hands. Stacy and Carl understood what I'd accomplished in ways that would become precious memories later. After each major milestone, they'd personally thank me, sometimes with handwritten notes that acknowledged how their revolutionary platform was only as strong as the technical foundation I'd built. When we landed our first major content partnership, I watched the launch from my desk at midnight, monitoring server performance while they celebrated in the conference room. Every stream that loaded perfectly, every user interaction that processed smoothly, represented months of coding, testing, and optimization that no one would ever see. But I knew. Every line of code powering that success had been written during countless late nights when the rest of Seattle was sleeping. The growth that followed felt like watching a plant you'd nurtured from seed suddenly burst into bloom. We moved from that cramped warehouse to a gleaming office tower in South Lake Union, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. Our team expanded from 3 employees to over 200, with departments for content acquisition, marketing, user experience, and business development. Aurora transformed from a local startup into an industry disruptor, attracting major Hollywood partnerships. Entertainment Weekly wrote features about our innovative streaming technology, and tech blogs analyzed our rapid user growth. Watching this evolution felt surreal, knowing that beneath every success story was the infrastructure I'd built line by line, server by server, protocol by protocol. This wasn't just a job for me. It became my life's work. Every system optimization I implemented, every security protocol I designed, represented years of expertise and dedication poured into something bigger than myself. When Aurora landed our first Emmy nomination for technical innovation, I felt genuine pride that my behind-the-scenes work was finally receiving industry recognition. But the signs had been there for months that something was shifting. New executives started joining the company, people with impressive resumes who spoke in buzzwords and treated technology like a commodity that could be easily replaced. They'd schedule strategy meetings that excluded technical staff, making decisions about platform features without consulting the people who understood how things actually worked. Despite Aurora's massive success, I was starting to sense that my role as the technical architect was being systematically diminished by people who didn't understand what I'd built. Then March arrived, and with it came someone who would change everything. Isabella Torres arrived at Aurora Entertainment with credentials that looked impressive on paper. Harvard MBA, former creative director at 2 major networks, and a reputation for transforming outdated digital strategies. Stacy and Carl introduced her during our monthly all-hands meeting, highlighting her experience at StreamVision and Digital First Media, companies known for their aggressive modernization approaches. Isabella stepped to the front of our conference room wearing a tailored blazer and the kind of confident smile that said she already knew exactly what needed fixing. Her first words were about bringing Aurora into the next phase of growth, and I noticed how her eyes swept over the room without really seeing any of us. Her first company presentation happened the following week, and I watched from the back row as Isabella outlined her vision for Aurora's future. She spoke in buzzwords that sounded important, but meant nothing. Content, ecosystem optimization, next-generation user experience paradigms, synergistic platform integration. The presentation lasted 90 minutes, filled with colorful charts and trendy frameworks, and she never once mentioned the technical infrastructure that made any of her proposed improvements possible. When someone asked about implementation timelines, Isabella smiled and said the technical details would be handled by her team of specialists. The warning signs started immediately. Isabella began scheduling strategy meetings that excluded technical staff, making decisions about platform features without consulting the people who would actually have to build them. I'd receive emails about new requirements after decisions had already been made, with implementation deadlines that showed no understanding of the complexity involved. When I tried to join one of these strategy sessions to explain technical constraints, Isabella's assistant politely informed me that the meeting was for senior leadership only. Isabella wasted no time hiring a team of consultants from her previous company, all focused on modernizing Aurora's approach and eliminating legacy thinking. These consultants arrived with expensive suits and MacBooks covered in startup stickers, conducting interviews with longtime employees about our current processes. They'd ask questions like, how do you measure content delivery optimization? And what frameworks are you using for scalable user engagement? When I explained our custom-built systems and why they worked better than off-the-shelf solutions, they'd nod politely and type notes that I knew would be filed under resistance to change. The frustration really started building during team meetings, where Isabella would dismiss my input as obstacles to innovation rather than valuable expertise. I'd raise concerns about platform stability during a proposed migration, and she'd respond with phrases like, "We need to think bigger," and "Legacy mindsets are holding us back." When I explained why her new feature requirements would require months of back-end development, Isabella would suggest we simply use existing tools that could implement them faster. She treated technical concerns like complaints from someone who didn't understand modern business strategy. The situation reached a new level of absurdity when Isabella started presenting my own architectural solutions to the board as if they were her recent strategic improvements. I watched her take credit for the content delivery optimizations I'd spent 2 years perfecting, reframing my work as examples of the forward-thinking approach she was bringing to Aurora. She'd show performance metrics that demonstrated our superior streaming quality, explaining how her team's analysis had identified key areas for enhancement. The board members nodded approvingly, impressed by Isabella's quick impact on company performance. Isabella announced her most ambitious plan during a department heads meeting in June, migrating Aurora's entire platform to something called the Cloudflow Framework, a trendy new system that promised to revolutionize content delivery. Despite my warnings about the risks to our stable, battle-tested infrastructure, Isabella dismissed my concerns as fear of change. She'd already contacted Cloudflow's implementation team and scheduled preliminary assessments. When I pointed out that our current system was handling millions of users without problems, Isabella responded that success today didn't guarantee success tomorrow. The final insult came when Isabella began bringing in outside developers to assess our current technical capabilities. These assessments were essentially audits of my work, conducted by people who'd been briefed about Aurora's need for modernization before they even looked at our systems. Isabella treated me like a junior employee during these sessions, introducing me as someone who could answer questions about legacy processes. I watched strangers examine code I'd written during sleepless nights, discussing whether it met current industry standards, while Isabella nodded along with their critiques. Little did Isabella know, she was building a case for major personnel changes that would position her as the visionary leader who would finally unleash Aurora's true potential. But she was about to discover exactly how essential those legacy systems really were. The quarterly review meeting was approaching, and I had a feeling this one would be different from all the others. The conference room filled with its usual Monday morning energy, as 40 department heads and senior staff members settled into their spots around the polished oak table. I stood at the front with my presentation remote, clicking through slides that showed our infrastructure performance metrics for the past 3 months. Server uptime was at 99.97%. Our content delivery speeds had improved by 12%, and user satisfaction scores remained consistently high. These numbers represented countless hours of optimization work, small improvements that kept Aurora running smoothly while our user base continued growing. I was halfway through explaining our latest server optimization improvements when Isabella's voice cut through the conference room with surgical precision. "Devin, I need to stop you there." The room went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her, then back at me, sensing something was about to happen. Isabella stood up from her seat at the far end of the table, her expression serious and professional. "I think this is actually a perfect opportunity to address some concerns I've been having about our technical direction." The way she said it made my stomach tighten, but I maintained my composure and nodded for her to continue. What came next was a systematic dismantling of everything I'd built over nearly 4 years. Isabella spoke with calm authority, describing how my coding practices were holding back Aurora's growth potential. She explained to the room how my resistance to modern frameworks was becoming a liability in today's competitive landscape. Each criticism landed like a physical blow, carefully crafted to sound reasonable and professional while destroying my credibility. She talked about legacy systems that needed urgent modernization, about how my attachment to older technologies was preventing Aurora from reaching its full potential. The room fell completely silent as Isabella continued her assault. I watched Stacy shift uncomfortably in her seat, clearly disturbed by what she was witnessing, while some newer executives nodded along with Isabella's assessment. I felt exposed and vulnerable, like I was standing naked in front of people I'd worked alongside for years. Isabella's attack felt calculated and personal, designed not just to criticize my work, but to destroy my standing within the company. She referenced specific projects I'd completed, reframing my solutions as examples of outdated thinking that needed to be corrected. When she mentioned the content delivery optimizations that had saved Aurora millions in infrastructure costs, she described them as temporary fixes that masked underlying architectural problems. Every accomplishment I'd been proud of was suddenly presented as evidence of my inability to think strategically about Aurora's future. The moment reached its devastating peak when Isabella declared that Aurora needed fresh technical leadership to compete in today's market. "Devin has given us adequate work over the years," she said, her tone suggesting she was being generous. But his methods are frankly pathetic in today's competitive landscape. We need someone who understands modern development practices and isn't afraid to embrace change. The phrase, frankly pathetic, echoed in my head, each word designed to humiliate me in front of my colleagues. I made a conscious decision not to defend myself in that moment. Isabella had clearly planned this performance, and anything I said would only give her more opportunities to tear me down. She'd already made up her mind about my value to the company, and arguing would make me look desperate and defensive. Instead, I stood there quietly, letting her words hang in the air while everyone watched to see if I'd fight back or crumble under the pressure. The only movement I made was reaching into my pocket for the small USB drive I'd been carrying for the past month. My fingers closed around the device, and I felt strangely calm, knowing that Isabella had no idea I held the deployment key to everything she was trying to eliminate. This tiny piece of hardware contained something that would soon change everything. But for now, I simply held it and listened to her finish her devastating critique of my professional competence. Isabella had just made the biggest mistake of her career, though she had no way of knowing it yet. What she and Aurora's current leadership had completely overlooked was something that would soon become very important to everyone in this room. The employment contract I'd signed in January 2020 contained standard freelancer protections that most established companies would never allow today. But Aurora wasn't an established company when I joined. They were desperate, underfunded, and facing the reality that talented senior engineers wouldn't work for equity and promises alone. Stacy and Carl needed someone who could build their entire technical foundation, and they needed that person to accept significantly below market rate compensation. The solution they offered was unusual, but not unheard of in early-stage startups struggling to attract top talent. During those negotiations nearly 4 years ago, standard freelance protection clauses had been included in my contract that seemed almost paranoid at the time. These protections were designed for situations where technical talent often becomes expendable once the hard work is finished, and companies start focusing on growth and marketing. The legal framework allowed me to retain ownership of certain core architectural components in exchange for working at startup wages while Aurora found its footing. The legal framework was crystal clear, though apparently no one at Aurora had bothered reviewing it recently. While Aurora owned the platform, content, user data, and brand, I personally owned 3 critical systems that made everything function. The encryption protocols that secured all user data and payment processing belonged to me legally. The API frameworks that connected Aurora's platform to content providers and third-party services were my intellectual property. Most importantly, the deployment keys that controlled how updates and changes were pushed to Aurora's live systems operated under licenses I controlled exclusively. These weren't minor components or optional features. They were the fundamental infrastructure that every other system depended on. Think of it like owning the foundation and electrical systems of a house, while someone else owns the walls and furniture. Without my components, Aurora's streaming platform was essentially a beautiful shell, with no way to actually deliver content to users or process the payments that kept the company running. The irony was staggering when I really thought about it. Aurora's explosive growth over 4 years had made these systems exponentially more valuable and critical, not less important, as Isabella seemed to believe. The company now depended entirely on infrastructure I legally controlled, serving millions of subscribers who had no idea their entire viewing experience relied on systems owned by the guy Isabella had just publicly humiliated. Every time someone logged into Aurora, streamed a movie, or made a payment, they were using technology that belonged to me personally rather than the company. I'd quietly maintained and updated these core systems over the years, treating them like any other part of my job responsibilities. Security patches, performance optimizations, scalability improvements. I'd handled everything without ever imagining I'd need to use my ownership rights as protection. The legal documentation lived in a filing cabinet at home, and I'd honestly forgotten about some of the specific clauses until Isabella's behavior made me review my original contract. The moment I realized what Isabella's plan actually meant was like watching dominoes line up for an inevitable fall. She wanted to eliminate me from Aurora, treating my contributions as outdated baggage that needed to be discarded. But her plan would essentially hand control of Aurora's entire technical foundation to someone the company had just fired. The legal implications were staggering and immediate. Without my cooperation, Aurora's streaming platform would become completely non-functional, unable to serve content to their millions of subscribers who paid monthly fees for access. Isabella had no idea that her modernization strategy would trigger a technical crisis that could destroy the company overnight. The consulting teams she'd brought in could assess my code all they wanted, but they couldn't legally access or modify the core systems that made Aurora work. The outside developers she'd hired to replace me would discover that the most critical components of Aurora's infrastructure were completely off-limits without my explicit permission. Isabella's public humiliation of me had just activated a legal landmine that could obliterate everything she was trying to modernize. But I wasn't planning to detonate it immediately. Sometimes the most devastating response requires perfect timing, and Isabella was about to provide exactly the opportunity I needed. 2 weeks later, Isabella announced Aurora's biggest product launch ever during our Monday morning all-hands meeting. She stood at the front of our main conference room, practically glowing with excitement as she described what she called Aurora Live, a massive streaming event featuring exclusive content premieres, celebrity interviews, and real-time interactive features for our premium subscribers. The event would showcase 3 major movie premieres, live concerts from Grammy-winning artists, and interactive Q&A sessions where viewers could submit questions in real time. Isabella presented this as Aurora's coming-of-age moment, the event that would establish us as a true competitor to Netflix and Disney+. The scale of preparation was unlike anything Aurora had attempted before. Marketing campaigns generated buzz through major entertainment partnerships and media coverage that treated Aurora Live as our defining moment. The publicity machine Isabella built around this launch was impressive, attracting attention from industry executives who'd previously dismissed Aurora as too small to matter. The technical requirements were absolutely staggering, demanding performance levels that would test every system I'd built over 4 years. Aurora Live needed to handle 10 times our normal traffic while delivering flawless 4K streaming to hundreds of thousands of concurrent users. The platform would manage real-time user interactions across multiple time zones, processing live chat messages, poll responses, and video submissions from viewers. Interactive features required seamless integration between our streaming infrastructure, user authentication systems, and content delivery networks. Every component would need to perform perfectly under unprecedented load, while maintaining the smooth user experience Aurora's subscribers expected. I watched from the sidelines as Isabella's new technical team scrambled to prepare systems they didn't fully understand. The consultants she'd brought in were making assumptions about our platform's capabilities based on documentation that barely scratched the surface of how things actually worked. They scheduled load testing sessions using generic tools that couldn't accurately simulate Aurora Live's specific requirements. I observed them discussing backup procedures for systems they'd never actually operated under stress, creating contingency plans that revealed their fundamental misunderstanding of our infrastructure's architecture. Isabella had scheduled investor presentations during the live event itself, planning to demonstrate Aurora's technical superiority to potential partners and financial backers. She'd invited representatives from 3 major investment firms and 2 acquisition-hungry media companies to watch Aurora Live from our executive conference room. The plan was brilliant from a business perspective, showcase our platform's capabilities while potential investors watched millions of users engage with exclusive content. Isabella wanted these decision-makers to witness Aurora's technical excellence firsthand, proving that our platform could compete with industry giants. Pressure built steadily as major entertainment industry figures confirmed their participation. A-list celebrities agreed to host interview segments, best-selling authors committed to exclusive book readings, and chart-topping musicians scheduled live performances. Each confirmation raised the stakes exponentially, making Aurora Live a make-or-break moment for our reputation and future growth. Failure wouldn't just disappoint subscribers. It would humiliate Aurora in front of the entertainment industry figures Isabella was courting for future partnerships. Isabella had been using this event to justify every leadership change she'd made, promising the board that Aurora's modernized technical approach would deliver unprecedented performance. She framed Aurora Live as validation of her vision, proof that eliminating outdated thinking had positioned Aurora for explosive growth. During board presentations, Isabella credited her strategic improvements for making such an ambitious event possible, describing how her team's fresh perspective had unlocked Aurora's true potential. The bitter irony was watching Isabella take credit for platform capabilities that existed entirely because of the infrastructure she'd been dismissing as outdated. Every feature that made Aurora Live possible, the content delivery optimization, the real-time interaction processing, the scalable streaming architecture, represented years of my work that she'd publicly declared useless. She spoke confidently about Aurora's technical superiority, while planning to eliminate the person who'd actually built those superior systems. The stakes couldn't have been clearer. If Aurora Live succeeded, Isabella's narrative about eliminating legacy thinking would be completely validated. But if the event failed, Aurora could lose everything we'd built over 4 years. The beautiful irony was that Isabella had scheduled this launch before finalizing my termination, apparently unaware that I still controlled the deployment keys to every critical system. She'd created the perfect stage to demonstrate exactly how essential my supposedly outdated work really was. Aurora Live launched at exactly 8 p.m. Pacific Time on Friday, June 15th, and the initial response was everything Isabella had promised. My monitoring dashboard showed thousands of premium subscribers logging in simultaneously, eager to experience Aurora's exclusive content and interactive features. The first hour unfolded flawlessly. Streams loaded instantly, chat messages flowed smoothly, and users engaged with polling features that Isabella's team had spent weeks perfecting. From my desk in the corner of our office, I watched the metrics climb steadily. Concurrent users hit 50,000, then 75,000, then crossed into six-figure territory as word spread across social media about Aurora's ambitious event. Behind the scenes, Isabella was delivering the performance of her career in our executive conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see her presenting to a room packed with investors and media representatives, gesturing confidently at screens, displaying Aurora's real-time performance metrics. She was taking credit for every technical achievement, explaining her vision for the company's future, while Aurora Live validated everything she'd promised about our modernized platform. The investors looked impressed as Isabella walked them through features that demonstrated Aurora's competitive advantages. I waited until 9:30 p.m., right as the evening's main event was beginning, an exclusive concert from a Grammy-winning artist that would draw Aurora Live's largest audience. That's when I activated my carefully prepared gift. I opened my laptop and executed a simple command that I'd written weeks earlier, a single line of code that would lock down every system I legally controlled. The cascade of failures began with surgical precision. First, the authentication servers went down, the foundational systems that verified every user login and maintained access permissions across Aurora's entire platform. User logins started failing immediately, with new subscribers unable to access the exclusive content they'd signed up for. Then the chat systems crashed, leaving thousands of users unable to interact during what was supposed to be Aurora's most engaging event. Finally, the video streaming infrastructure collapsed as existing streams began freezing mid-playbook, transforming Isabella's polished broadcast into a stuttering disaster. I watched Isabella's growing panic through the conference room windows as her technical team frantically tried to diagnose the problem. They were discovering that every critical system was returning authentication errors, and none of their administrative access could override the lockdown I'd implemented. The consultants Isabella had brought in were running diagnostic tools that showed everything was technically functional, but nothing would actually work. The outside developers she'd hired to replace me were staring at screens full of error messages they'd never seen before. The investor presentation transformed from triumph to disaster as Aurora's revolutionary platform failed spectacularly in front of the very people Isabella was trying to impress with her leadership. Instead of showcasing technical superiority, Isabella found herself explaining why Aurora's streams were freezing during their biggest promotional event ever. The investors watched their potential investment opportunity crumble in real time, while media representatives witnessed what would become tomorrow's cautionary tale about streaming platform reliability. My gift included one final touch that I'd spent considerable time perfecting. Every error screen displayed a simple message that cut through Isabella's technical explanations with surgical precision. System temporarily unavailable. Please contact Devin Grant for technical support. The message appeared on user devices, administrator dashboards, and monitoring screens throughout Aurora's office. Anyone trying to access Aurora's platform would see exactly who they needed to contact for assistance, making it impossible for Isabella to hide what was really happening. Frustrated subscribers began sharing screenshots of Aurora's failure across social media, documenting the company's inability to deliver promised content during its most important launch ever. What should have been Aurora's triumph was becoming a public relations nightmare that would damage our reputation for months. The ultimate irony was staggering in its completeness. Isabella's attempt to eliminate outdated technical leadership had just proven that Aurora literally could not function without the expertise she dismissed as useless. Every system failure, every error message, every frustrated subscriber represented validation of the infrastructure I'd built over 4 years. The modernized platform Isabella had promised her investors was completely dependent on the legacy systems she'd publicly declared obsolete. As Aurora Live collapsed around her, Isabella was about to discover that some problems require more than buzzwords and consulting teams to solve. My phone started ringing at 9:47 p.m., right as Aurora Live was reaching its peak failure point. Calls from Stacy, Carl, then Isabella, all rolled in with increasing desperation as Aurora's entire platform remained locked down. I let them go to voicemail until 10:15 p.m., when I finally answered Stacy's fourth call. Her voice was strained, professional composure cracking as she asked if I could help them understand what was happening with the authentication systems. I told her I'd be happy to discuss technical support arrangements first thing Monday morning. The silence on her end spoke volumes. By Saturday morning, Aurora's leadership team was offering increasingly generous terms for my immediate cooperation. Carl sent emails proposing emergency consulting fees that tripled my current salary. Stacy called with offers of stock options and performance bonuses. Isabella, who'd declared my work useless just days earlier, left voicemails describing urgent technical needs that only I could address. Each offer revealed their growing panic as Aurora Live's failure dominated weekend tech news coverage. I simply smiled and responded that I'd review any formal proposals through my attorney. The emergency board meeting happened Monday morning, and I could hear raised voices through the conference room walls from my desk 50 feet away. Board members demanded explanations from Isabella about how the company's supposedly outdated technical foundation had turned out to be completely essential for basic operations. She couldn't explain why Aurora's modernized platform had failed so catastrophically, or why none of her consulting teams could restore functionality to systems they'd spent weeks assessing. The woman who'd built her reputation on eliminating legacy thinking was discovering that some legacy systems were irreplaceable. When the board finally called me in for discussions, I didn't just negotiate my return. I restructured Aurora's entire technical leadership approach. The agreement I proposed included my immediate promotion to Chief Operations Officer, with final approval authority over all infrastructure decisions. No future technical assessments would proceed without my direct involvement. The consulting teams Isabella had hired were terminated immediately, and any future technical partnerships required my written approval. I also secured equity compensation that reflected my true value to Aurora's success, including retroactive stock options dating back to my original hiring. The public vindication came through industry publications that covered Aurora Live's spectacular failure. TechCrunch published a detailed analysis of how dismissing experienced technical talent can have catastrophic consequences for streaming platforms, creating cautionary tales that would influence hiring decisions across the industry. The articles highlighted Aurora's dependence on infrastructure that had been publicly dismissed as outdated, proving that quiet competence often holds more power than flashy presentations. Isabella's departure became inevitable once the board recognized that her leadership style had created an existential crisis threatening everything Aurora had achieved. She submitted her resignation Wednesday morning, citing philosophical differences about the company's technical direction. The press release thanked her for her contributions, while emphasizing Aurora's commitment to respecting the expertise of all team members. I watched her clean out her office, with the same professional composure she'd used to humiliate me, though her hands shook slightly as she packed her awards and credentials. The restoration process gave me tremendous satisfaction as I worked with my technical team, the same people Isabella had dismissed as obsolete, to rebuild subscriber trust and partner confidence. We implemented new monitoring systems that prevented similar failures, improved communication protocols between technical and business teams, and created documentation that would help future leaders understand our infrastructure's complexity. Watching my colleagues work with renewed confidence and respect reminded me why I'd loved building Aurora from the beginning. Aurora's recovery became a company-wide lesson about respecting expertise and contributions from every team member, regardless of tenure or visibility. Stacy and Carl instituted new policies requiring technical input on all major business decisions. Department heads received training about collaborating with technical teams rather than simply issuing requirements. The warehouse-to-tower journey that had defined Aurora's growth story gained a new chapter about learning from near-catastrophic mistakes. This experience taught me to never again underestimate my own value or allow anyone to diminish the importance of my contributions. I'd spent years quietly building systems that enabled Aurora's success without demanding recognition or credit. Isabella's attack forced me to recognize and defend my worth in ways that ultimately strengthened both my position and Aurora's technical foundation. The humiliation that had seemed devastating became the catalyst for professional growth I hadn't known I needed. Sometimes the best response to public humiliation is demonstrating exactly how wrong the humiliator really was. Isabella's declaration that my work was useless became the most expensive mistake in Aurora's history, costing the company millions in lost revenue and damaged reputation. But it also proved something fundamental about the nature of expertise and respect in the workplace. The foundation builders of any organization hold quiet power that becomes visible only when someone tries to eliminate them. My story demonstrates that genuine expertise cannot be dismissed by flashy presentations and corporate buzzwords, and that the people who actually make things work deserve respect, not humiliation, from leaders who don't understand what they're trying to destroy. Isabella's words had cut through that conference room like a blade, but they became the catalyst for my ultimate triumph. Her modernization strategy crashed into the reality of who actually controlled Aurora's infrastructure, proving that sometimes the most devastating response to workplace betrayal is simply letting someone discover exactly how much they need what they just tried to eliminate. Share a time when quiet expertise saved the day. I'd love to hear your stories of technical vindication.